Welcome back once again, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of College Football Pros. I'm your host, as always, Nick, and I'm joined by my co-host, Drew Van Jura, and we are excited today to have a special guest on the show to talk about the Mountain West and Colorado State with us. It is Kelly Lyell from Fort Collins, Coloradian. How are you doing today, Kelly?
Good. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing fantastic. We're about to talk some Mountain West there with some Colorado State. So, you know what? Let's get right into it. Mike Bobo coming in from Georgia, gets thrust into an offense with arguably the best receiver in the nation, with Rashard Higgins. Let's talk a little bit about, Rashard Higgins, maybe, how good is this kid really?
He's very, very good. He's legit. Anybody who hasn't had a chance to watch him needs to. He's fast. He's elusive. Some of those plays where he broke free for deep passes from Garrett Grayson is now with the New Orleans Saints. Other times he caught little 1-yard passes and juked a couple guys at the line of scrimmage and took off and went for touchdowns. 17 touchdowns, led the country last year. 1,750 yards, receiving yards, which also led the country. And he set a school record with 96 catches. He's the real deal.
I'm going to talk Garrett Grayson for a second, just as a little, just as a little bit of a sidestep. But first of all, did you happen to get a chance to catch him at all in the preseason game last night?
I got to see his statistics. I haven't yet had a chance to watch it. I actually taped a replay of it this afternoon, but I hope to kind of fast forward through to watch some of his playing later on this evening.
Well, he had one really strong non-passing play where he just, it looked like it was out of an NBA 2K game, the way his footwork was. It was one of the most impressive specimens I've ever seen of an NFL quarterback in maneuvering around. It was just amazing to see how he sunk the lineman that was coming after him and how that lineman bit and he was just off and the lineman was... you could just see the look on his face. He was just completely confused and lost about what happened. So, with that being said, Drew and I have talked already a couple of times on this podcast, and we're on a little bit of differing opinions here. I think that it's tough for Colorado State to lose a kid who was the offensive player of the year in the Mountain West Conference, and I personally feel that it is going to be tough for Higgins to remain that productive, because that's just a wildly productive season. That is just amazing. There's no doubting that. And this kid's got first-round talent. He's oozing with potential. What do you see as being a realistic output for Rashard Higgins in 2015?
I kind of think he's going to have troubles putting up numbers as significant as he did last year, too, for two reasons. One is he's going to be the focal point of every defense facing Colorado State. If you're not worried about Rashard Higgins, then you're not watching the film. You're not studying your opponent. So he's going to get all kinds of unique, weird coverages. I think he's still good enough to have a 1,500-yard, 15-touchdown kind of season. He's probably not going to get 90 catches, maybe 60, 70. But I think he's an explosive enough player that no matter what they do, they're not going to be able to keep him down. And he is far and away the number one weapon this Colorado State football team is going to have on offense. And, Mike Bobo is a first-year coach, and he's going to find a way to get the ball to Rashard Higgins in some way, shape, or form. And I think Rashard's going to produce. Again, I don't think he's going to be able to quite get the last year's numbers because those were pretty phenomenal, but I think he's still going to have a very good season and be statistically one of the top receivers in the country. And talent-wise, I think he could easily be the best in the country this year.
I think we should take the other end of that receiving capabilities and go to the quarterback position. And, you lose a guy like Garrett Grayson. Does Nick Stevens step in, and is he the guy moving forward that Bobo is going to tag as a starter coming into the season?
I think so. I just actually just put up a story on our website a little while ago about, they could name the starter as early as Sunday based on what happens with their first scrimmage tomorrow. It's a closed session, so we won't get to see what happens. But I think Nick Stevens is going to be the guy. He's the one that played the most. He was Garrett Grayson's backup last year, looked good in the limited action he saw. He's a really smart quarterback, picked up this offense and what Mike Bobo wants really quickly. has no trouble with the up-tempo pace that Mike Bobo's looking for, the no-huddle. And he's got good physical skills that really got a lot better after spending time in the spring with this coaching staff, and when they got to work with him more on his footwork and his delivery, and he looks pretty sharp. I think Coleman Key, the guy battling him for the starting job, could be a very good college quarterback someday, but I think it's Nick Stevens' job to lose at this point. I'd be surprised if he's not the guy under center for the majority of snaps for Colorado State this year.
Now, sticking within and ending the talk on the passing game, I want to talk about somebody who wasn't around in 2014, but looks like he's going to be around in 2015, and that's Kevon Cartwright. What type of impact do you think he's going to have, and how is his health situation? How is his progress from coming back from what I believe, was it an ankle injury?
It's a foot and ankle thing. He had surgery on it. A pin apparently didn't hold. They've been a little limited on what the details were, but he's looked really good in what parts of practice we're able to watch. They're still kind of being cautious with him and limiting him a little bit. They don't want to risk aggravating it again. He maybe came back a little bit too quickly last year for how it healed. He did play in the opening game, caught a big pass on a 3rd and 5 play for a 12-yard gain against Colorado in the opener, and then was unable, went down while being tackled on that play, re-injured the ankle, and was given the extra year, the hardship year, the 6th year of eligibility, et cetera, to come back this year. But he's a real talent. He's an NFL prospect. He has been seen as an NFL prospect for the last several years, and if he's healthy, he's a guy that Colorado State's going to have to find a way to get the ball to a lot as well, because he's a really dangerous weapon on the as a tight end.
Colorado State has had very good coaching staffs in the recruiting aspect of it, and they've produced talent, from Higgins to Grayson to Carter to all these guys. I mean, we're from the Northeast Ohio area, and we're not really familiar how high school football is out in the Colorado area. So, how is it compared to other states that surround, does Colorado State go down, I see the recruiting list, they go from North Carolina to Colorado to California. How important is, Mike Bobo going to be for the recruiting aspect of everything?
It's interesting. Colorado produces some pretty good football talent, certainly not enough to build an entire roster about. That's why they go to Southern California, Texas, traditionally. Florida has always been, really even dating back to Sonny Lubbock's era, has always been a recruiting area for Colorado State. I think Mike Bobo knows his areas. The staff is really targeting those same areas that they have. The difference is he's got some other connections in the South that he's going to use in Georgia, in the Carolinas, in Kentucky, wherever it is. He's not going to be foolish and not use those contacts he's got. But I think ultimately they need to, really zero in on their normal recruiting areas, and he seems to be doing that. Both Northern and Southern California, Texas, and again, a handful of guys every year from Florida, in addition to then trying to really make sure you're getting a good chunk of Colorado guys, 5 to 7 to 8 guys out, in-state kids every year, because Colorado does produce some decent talent. Their hard part is usually the top 4 or 5 players in the state end up going to a Nebraska or a Southern Cal or a Texas or, some big on Iowa, some big power outside the state, and they really, really want to work harder at keeping those guys in-state.
Taking a little bit of a step back, over the past few years, Colorado State has had some very good luck with running backs. In 2013, Capri Bibbs had just one of the most amazing seasons that I had seen in some times. And I'm relatively new, just within the last 3 or 4 years here at being a diehard college football fan. And Bibbs was just kind of broke out of nowhere, I think, when Chris Nocky went down. Then obviously last year you had D. Hart, the Alabama transfer, who was very highly talented, and I think that the expectations were for him to have a very good season. I don't know that anybody quite expected him to have the season that he had. What does this position hold in 2015 now, with Hart making an early exit for some hope in the NFL?
The That's a good question. I think that they've got some guys that are pretty capable. Mike Bobo says he's got 4 guys that he thinks are all potentially pretty explosive backs in that backfield. I think the guy that's been kind of interesting is Dalen Dawkins. He's a transfer from Purdue, and he's looked really, really good. He was very impressive in the spring practices, and then Treyas Gerald, who really was battling with D. Hart for the starting job last year. D. Hart didn't really beat him out as much as Treyas Gerald's got an ankle injury that sort of thrust D. Hart into a little more action, and then Treyas never really got healthy enough to get a chance to win that spot back. But he's also a very, very good back. They're both kind of the smaller, undersized guys, though. Neither of them are going to be that big bruising kind of back. And I know ultimately that's what Mike Bobo hopes to have, but he just doesn't have anybody on the roster right now that fills that bill. So you're going to see, some smaller, strong, shifty guys that have some speed and I think have some durability, but you're not going to have that just a big, powerful back like he was used to having at Georgia to work with.
I mean, where me and Nick differ on the aspect of, I'm really high on Colorado State coming into season with a guy like Higgins. But I look at the defense and I look at the 8 returning starters or projected starters at this point in the season. With Bobo's offensive background, how is he coming in, handling the defense and really a defense that has a lot of, big time playing experience?
He's really leaving that to his defensive coordinator, Tyson Summers, who comes from Central Florida, where he really turned around that program to where they were one of the top statistic defensive units in the country last year. And I think he's just kind of letting Tyson and the defensive coaches take that and run with it a little bit. Certainly, he has some input into what they're doing, but he's really kind of staying more involved in the offense and letting Tyson and those defensive assistants, including 2 guys who were on the staff here last year that are back one guy, Marty English, and letting him, linebackers coach, really kind of letting them do their thing. They've got Terry Fair coaching the cornerbacks out of Tennessee. They've got some really talented assistants on this staff, and I think he's just trusting them to do their thing. Tyson Summers has these guys playing with a different mentality. He wants to be much more of an attacking defense, a lot less, reading and reacting. And it'll be interesting to see how that works. I think that fits their skill, their talent level better than the reading and reacting, because I just don't think they necessarily have tremendous strength to overpower people, but I think they have a lot of good, quick, strong, big athletic guys, but maybe not guys that can overpower people when you're trying to do that read and react stuff. So I think it'll be interesting, but I think it could be a very, very good defense this year.
So let's take a step outside of Colorado State and just look at the Mountain West as a greater conference. I think that this is a really pivotal year for a lot of reasons for many teams. There's a lot of quarterback change that appears to be going on. It seems like there looks to be more change in this conference than most of the others that we've looked at. I think this is also a conference that had some defenses that really, really struggled in 2014. Over the past several years, Boise State has kind of been in a very strong position. And do you think that the loss of Hedrick and Jay Ajayi are going to put them in a compromised position on the offensive side of the ball to where we could see a Colorado State or a Utah State or maybe even an Air Force or San Diego State kind of jump up and take control this year?
That's hard to say. Boise State has been really good in the past, really, even before they got in the Mountain West when they were still in the WAC. Really good at just kind of, filling the holes and moving on. Obviously those are 2 huge losses. Grant Hedrick was a very good quarterback, and Jay Ajayi was a really big, strong, durable running back, the kind of guy that could just, when you took a lead, he could just wear you down and run out the clock. They're going to maybe miss that, but I'm convinced they're still going to have some pretty good talent. And I really I think their defense has been sort of underrated over the years. People look so much because they get kind of flashy on offense, but they've had pretty solid defensive play. And I think they still have a really good defense. But it is, I'd still say they're the team to beat in this conference. Utah State and Colorado State could give them a little bit of a run for their money in that Mountain Division, maybe even Air Force. The Mountain Division has definitely proven to be stronger at this point than the West Division. San Diego State, I think, should be the class of the West Division without much trouble. But like you said, there were some great quarterbacks the last couple of years in this league, and they're gone. I mean, with the exception of Chucky Keaton at Utah State, pretty much everybody is breaking in new quarterbacks, or if they have a returner, it was a guy that really didn't do anything all that impressive last year and might not even keep the job this year. So it'll be really interesting to see how that shakes out. I still think that whoever wins the Mountain West is probably still going to be the team in that Access Bowl for the Group of Five. I don't see any of the other conferences necessarily bumping the Mountain West out of that spot at this point. And I would say that a Boise State, a Utah State, a Colorado State, a San Diego State would all probably have teams that are worthy of that if they're able to win the Mountain West.
Yeah, I actually agree. When we've talked about before, on our podcast, we're really high on Chucky Keaton coming this season. But, at the end of the day, we're talking Colorado State. And, I think this is a team that can compete, in the Mountain West for the title. Just want to get your opinion. Do you think this team can win double-digit games again this year?
That's hard to say. I think they'll be really hard-pressed to get to 10 wins. That took some special things, and really it took they won a lot of close games where that senior leadership came through. Garrett Grayson's 4th and 11 pass, to beat Boston College with a 12-yard touchdown type thing in the final minute, little over, I think it was 101, 102 remaining. That set them off. That really gained confidence, and they went on a string where they won a lot of tight games right after that. I don't they're necessarily going to have that level of confidence this year that might carry them through some of those tight games. So I think they're more like a 7-8, maybe a 9-win team this year, which is still pretty good and could still, still get them to a bowl game. And we'll still have them, I think, in contention for the Mountain West title, depending on how they do in those early conference games. Actually, their first 2 conference games are at Utah State and then Boise State at home. So we're going to know pretty early on if they're a contender in this conference or not. But going into the year, I think they are.
We like to ask our guests when we bring them on the show at this point what their playoff scenario is in 2015. So would you like to share yours?
I would have to say that I think right now I would have probably some combination of Ohio State, TCU, Oregon, and Alabama in those games. Maybe Michigan State or Auburn or Baylor sliding in, but I really think Ohio State's going to be pretty hard to unseat. I think TCU is going to have a really, really good team this year, and I always like what Oregon does. I think Oregon's always a really tough offense for opponents to stop, and if they stay healthy, who knows what could happen. So I'm liking kind of the 4 usual suspects, I guess. Sorry, I'm not bringing in any wild cards here when I say those 4 teams, because I think that's probably pretty much the consensus across the country is Ohio State, TCU, Oregon, and Alabama probably as those 4 teams.
Yeah, I think it's Ohio State and the rest of Division One, and then you're right with TCU, Oregon, with Vernon Adams finally getting eligible and playing there. So, but I think it's Ohio State's to lose.
I think it probably is too. I think what they have and what they have coming back last year was supposed to be a rebuilding year, and you lose multiple quarterbacks. You're in a rebuilding year, and you still go out and dominate the way they did. I think that's going to be a really hard thing for anybody else to compete with.
All right, Kelly, well, we like to also give our guests the opportunity to let our listeners know what they're involved in and where to find you, so the platform is yours right now to tell us anything you want to tell us.
Well, just check out we'll have lots of coverage of Colorado State and the Mountain West in general on our website, coloradoan.com, COLORADOAN, and we're looking forward to a fun season. We've got a lot of things, especially on our website. We've got a website that's quite a bit ahead of maybe of what our print circulation would suggest. So check it out if you get a chance.
We will do that. We want to thank you again for coming on the show, and hope to have you back in the future.
All right. Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Another thank you to Kelly for joining the show to talk about the Mountain West. And moving right along with the schedule of events for today, Drew, let's talk about the Mountain West. What are your initial thoughts about the Mountain West this year?
I think this is a conference that doesn't get talked about a lot, and they have a lot of high-profile, high-power teams. And by that I don't mean, national powers or anything like that, but you look at Boise State, Nevada with Kaepernick a couple years ago, Utah State, Air Force. So these are teams that people know about, but they may not know about them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's one of those. It's probably the premier group of 5 conference. Would you say?
Yeah.
I'd say it would be
say
the
that,
SEC of the group of 5 in terms of the attention that it gets.
Yeah.
With a large reason for that being the run of Boise State those years, the earlier in the 2000s. I think that really propelled it into the national attention. Hawaii also had a very strong program in the mid 2000s. Huge passing attack. So I think the Mountain West to me is kind of like the top tier of group of 5 conferences. And that's no disrespect to any other group of 5 conference, but it's the one that has had like the biggest premier program, I would think.
Yeah, and they produce a lot of good talent, a lot of good receivers, a lot of good defensive players coming from this conference. So I am actually really excited to talk about some of these teams.
I am too. The one thing that strikes me is just, and we talked about this a little bit with Kelly as well, is that this conference seems to be depleted of their starting quarterbacks. It's epidemic for a college to lose a starting quarterback because it's not like the NFL where you could have them for their career should you want to. It's a much shorter frame for college schools. You have 2, 3, if you're extremely lucky, 4 years that you're going to end up getting out of a player. And there are just a ton of teams that are starting fresh this year at quarterback.
Yeah, starting fresh or returning guys maybe that haven't played in a couple years because of injury or transfer situations. But yeah, I agree. And a lot of times with these type of teams, you have quarterbacks stay for 4 years because, they may not be the prototypical NFL guy. You know what I mean? They're probably really talented, such as a Kaepernick. Boise's producing really good quarterbacks, but they probably will stay for the 4 years.
I totally agree with you, and without further ado, we will start in the Mountain Division with Air Force. In 2014, they had the 10th worst passing offense, the 7th best rushing offense for an overall offensive ranking of 55th, the 105th passing defense, the 28th rushing defense for an overall defensive ranking of 62nd. They scored 31.5 points, and they allowed 24.2, and this is another situation where when you look at the passing offense and the numbers there, it isn't due to a lack of talent at quarterback, it's just due to the fact that they don't pass the ball.
No, and I think actually that might change this year. I know Troy Calhoun's triple option offense, he runs it to a T, he runs it just as well as Paul Johnson, but their quarterback coming in this year, Nate Romine, is actually a really athletic guy, and he can pass, he can run, and he can read that defense where maybe the quarterbacks of the past at Air Force haven't been able to do that. So this is a team this year, they averaged, would you say, 31 points a game?
Yes.
That's a lot of points. I know they had 10 wins. So when you win 10 wins, you're putting up 31 points a game. This is a team that very honestly is my sleeper in the Mountain West because with the running backs, with Jacoby Owens, Devin Rushing, they've got some talented offensive weapons.
Well, look, I think the biggest thing to look at here is they have some talented wideouts, too. And when you see an offense that has such a low ranking passing the ball, you kind of assume that it's poor quarterback play or you just don't have the depth of talent that you want to be able to pass the ball. Because if defenders can key in on one receiver, you could lock them down. If the other receivers aren't talented enough to create routes and get open in the field, inevitably you can shut down a passing offense very quickly. Well, Jalen Robinette's good. He is a very talented receiver, and if they do decide to focus a little more on the quarterback throwing the ball, I think this could be a highly effective efficient offense. And when I say focus on the quarterback throwing the ball, I mean taking some of those designed run plays away from the quarterback and substituting them in with passing plays. I think that Romine could still get around on his feet, but I think if you use some of his strengths, like putting the ball in the air, it could really benefit this team.
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement. And the one thing that I really like about this offense is obviously this is projected and injuries happen and stuff like that. But projected, every single one of the starters are juniors or seniors. So when you have a group of guys that have been playing together at the Air Force Academy, mind you, so you know they're well disciplined, they're well trained. This team is going to know where everybody's supposed to be and why. So I want to throw out a statement, and don't even know if this is going to make sense. This could be a triple option offense with a passing dimension that is unheard of. It sounds weird coming out, but like you said, they have receivers. They've got their running backs. They've got everything. This team is so unique to me. It really is.
I like it too. My one concern, I think, is on defense a little bit. The rushing defense was very strong in 2014, but it's going to take some big losses, and I think that the front seven are down slightly from last year. They don't lose anyone alarming at defensive back, but it wasn't exactly the strongest group as it is. Could some of that be because teams were down? It is. We talk about that a lot with teams like Baylor and TCU, but the margin of win here at only 7 points doesn't make me feel like that was the case. When you were looking at those other teams, you were looking at, sometimes as much as 3.5 touchdowns difference between what they score and what they allowed. So I think it's definitely worth keeping an eye on here. And at the end of the day, that could be one thing that keeps them from taking the next step in the Mountain West.
Right. I think 10 wins is doable again this year.
That's a good year.
Absolutely right. Hands down. I do want to point out one individual. I don't normally do this, but I want to point out one guy. Strong safety, Weston Steelhammer. I mean, besides Eric Straker at Oklahoma, a linebacker, is there a better name for a defensive player than Steelhammer?
No, there's not. I am partial to Wonderful Terry of Western Kentucky fame, but for a whole different reason. I mean, it's just a superstar name, whereas Steelhammer is like...
And you go to Air Force.
We're
awesome.
talking about some serious professional wrestling names here, Drew.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think that's a record, bringing wrestling into the actual podcast. Into actual organic conversation.
Ironically, this having nothing to do with wrestling and having everything to do with my ADD, I was considering doing as a segment on one of the shows right before the year started, the best names in college football. Because there's tons of them, like Dabo Swinney. That's a great name. I just love trying to work that into normal conversation. I just love how it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some really cool names. And what do you think the kicker from Pitt, his last name is Blewett? It's like Steve Blewett or something like that.
There's also a Royals prospect named Scott Blewett, so that's interesting.
I wonder if they're related. I don't know. Investigative 101, college football pros.
Moving along to a team that I think is in a very interesting position this year. That's the Boise State Broncos, who had the 24th passing offense, the 31st rushing offense, the 14th overall offense, the 76th passing defense, the 36th rushing defense, and the 49th overall defense. They scored the nine most points in the country at 39.7 per game. They allowed 26.8. And this is a team that is losing a lot. You're losing your core at quarterback with Grant Hedrick. You're losing a dynamic player in Jay Ajayi. Matt Miller is also gone. You're losing 3 key players at 3 key positions on offense.
Yeah, and Ryan Finley stepping in at the quarterback position is going to have a very dynamic receiver in Thomas Spurbeck. This is a deep threat guy, NFL talent, junior, deep threat ability. My question becomes, the running back position to me is been depleted with Ajayi gone. Who steps in? Do they stay healthy? So to me, the running back position is a big question mark on this team.
I'll throw some names out there. Jeremy McNichols did a good job when he got the opportunity last year to spell Ajayi. I really liked what his capabilities are. To me, he reminds me of a smaller Ajayi. Don't think we're talking the same level of talent, but if they have a strong offensive line and guys like Spurbeck, and let's also throw in a few other names at receiver, Shane Williams-Rhodes is back. I mean, he was the number 2 receiver last year, and I think that he was a guy whose statistics didn't match up to what they should have been. I actually think he should have been better had it not been for some good defensive plays as well as some poor throws by the quarterback and things like getting tackled at the 1 or 2 yard line. And also, they have some good tight ends. I really like Jake Rowe. I like Holden Huff. They add a dynamic to the offense that really makes it fun to watch, and it gives them threats at literally every corner of the field. The other running back is Kelsey Young. Don't know a lot about him, but I keep hearing good things that he might come in and actually he might be the 1A of the rushing attack. So that's something as camp continues, you're going to want to keep your eye on and see who is getting the majority of the work.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting aspect of it. The lineman returns everybody. So, I mean, if you're whoever the running back is, like we've said before, if you return your whole offensive line, it's a good dynamic to have. Defensively, they're going to be, I think, strong again. This team is what it is. I mean, they're a good mid-major team. They're going to put up points. They're going to do their best on defense. The schedule isn't very daunting. At a conference, you're looking at Washington, BYU, and at Virginia. So not really anything to strike fear in you, but if you win those 3 games, that's impressive. From a Boise State team that maybe last year surprised some people. This year if they get to 10, 11, 12 wins, I think it's a good year.
I mean, if they get to 13 wins, they've won every game, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say that's more than a good year. I think at that point you have to be talking about them in the playoff conversation just because no one is going to
There's no way.
There's a low likelihood that anyone other than TCU or Baylor, one of those two, and Ohio State goes undefeated. There's definitely an opportunity if there's 2 loss SEC teams and they're the only undefeated team. Here's what I'm trying to say. I don't think that scenario is going to happen because, quite honestly, I don't see this Boise State team being able to do the stretch. And that's what any team that is outside of the Power 5 needs to do. They have to be able to run the whole stretch. This team is not going to be able to do it. I'm not saying their schedule is overly daunting, but with the question marks that they have to make up at quarterback and running back, they're at a little bit of a disadvantage to start the year, and that's where you're typically playing a lot of your non-conference games. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm just saying that my illustration was less to say that I think that this team has a shot at the playoffs and more to say that there's no shot that this team's going to win them all.
Right. No, I mean, I see what you're saying there, but the stretch to me, I mean, besides the top, 4 games, you throw in Idaho State September 18th, so you kind of skip over that game. But in October, they play at Colorado State and at Utah State back-to-back weeks. So,
and that's tough.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, we're going to talk about these 2 teams later on, but I really like specifically Utah State and Colorado State. So the schedule makers didn't do them any favors, but out of conference wise, even if they do go undefeated, I don't see, Washington, BYU, and Virginia having such strong seasons that they're going to propel Boise to the, playoffs. I really don't.
No, I don't think. I think it's really a moot point. They're not going to be in a situation where they're going to be looked at. I think you'd have to say that this team is probably less talented than it was last year. And they went 12-2 last year. I mean, that's not to say that the talent they had last year defines any variance that could happen this year. I'm just saying I don't think this team could perform like it did in 2014. And I think you're in agreement with me on that.
No, I mean, definitely going bowling, definitely probably a 10-11 win team.
Yep, not going to disagree with you there. Moving along to one of the teams that is going to stand in front of them in their quest to a perfect season will be Colorado State. In 2014, they had the 8th-ranked passing offense, the 71st-ranked rushing offense, the 19th-ranked overall offense, the 57th-ranked passing defense, the 98th-ranked rushing defense, the 87th-ranked overall defense. They scored 33.9 points, and they allowed 25.1. And yes, you heard it here first. This is a team that could take the biggest step down of potentially all of them in the Mountain West.
I don't know if I agree with you. And I'm going to give you one name, and I'm going to give you his stats. Rashard Higgins, 1,750 yards, 17 touchdowns. Blitnikoff Award finalist for the best receiver in the nation. You have this guy in the field. You're facing Mountain West defenses who predominantly aren't very good. I mean, with the exception of a couple players, a couple here and there. Quarterback, Nick Stevens, stepping in, replacing Garrett Grayson, who broke every single record known to man at that school. So I actually am cautiously optimistic that this team stays where they were last year, or even might get a tad bit better on offense because Rashard Higgins has had another year in the weight room studying his playbook, and I think this kid has his head on straight, and I think he's a first-round pick.
I think he's got his head on straight. I think he's been in the weight room. I think he's the first-round pick. I'm going to have to send you in for testing of a variety of kinds if you think that he's going to outproduce or even produce what he did in 2014. He was playing with a much, much better quarterback. And
how do you know?
Okay, so even if that's a wash, they don't have D. Hart. D. Hart was an Alabama transfer, and not just that. Let me read you his statistics. 1,275 and 16 touchdowns. It's a lot of offensive production and a huge drop at talent behind him. Now, if you want to say, how do I know? That's fair. I'm not going to argue with you. The fact is you don't know until you get on the field, but every indicator would suggest that you're not going to have a sophomore quarterback that passed the ball 25 times the previous year step in and throw for 4,000 yards and 32 touchdowns like the Mountain West Offensive Player of the Year did the previous year. It's just not going to happen.
I'm just cautiously optimistic. I am, because, I mean, this team, when you have a kid like Rashard Higgins, I don't care where you're at. I don't care if you're, when you have a talent like this, you get him the ball. I don't care if there's 11 guys covering him. This guy's that talented where he's going to get open, and he's going to find the open slot, and he's going to go far for touchdowns.
I mean, more power to you if you think that. I'm not saying he's going to have a bad year, but I think that he peaked. I don't think that he's going to put up the production this year that he did last year. I'm going to be more than happy for you if you're right, because there's nothing I want to see more than these guys that give us stuff to talk about, give us a platform like this podcast, and, we're fans of the sport, so I like Rashard Higgins. He's one of our poster boys, literally one of our poster boys.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm all there with you on his talent level, but I think sometimes, first of all, number one, you need to have some people behind you, and number two, you know what he didn't have last year?
What was it?
He didn't have Kevon Cartwright, and that's the tight end. And with him coming back this year, I am not reasonably convinced that production is sustainable. I
mean, I like the defense. Returning 8 starters. I mean, how do you not like that?
No,
I think this team on offense, people are skeptical, and rightfully so. However, I don't know. Maybe I am too high on this team, but I just think with the offense and defense returning a lot of upperclassmen and a lot of experience and a lot of talent, I think this team could stay on par with what they did last year. I'm not saying they're going to be in a Final Four like Boise, but I think they're capable of being the same as they were last year.
Honestly, at the end of the day, I'm not trying to talk you out of saying that this is a good team, because we are still like 19 or 20 days away from the season starting and nothing has been put on the field yet. So, right now, SMU has just as good of a chance as Alabama does. They're both 0-0. Nothing's been decided. All I'm going by is just, I personally just don't believe with the loss of Grayson that this team is going to be able to hang. I think it's going to be a step back. If they went 10-3 last year, I don't know if I'm optimistic at double-digit wins. I'd put them somewhere around 8. I mean, just looking at their schedule, they've got Boise State. They do have that at home. I mean, they have Minnesota. I think that's a tough game for them.
Let me ask you a daily fantasy question. Rashard Higgins going against Savannah State week 1, September 5th.
He won't be on there. Nope, they won't put that game up. Because they don't do that against. They don't usually.
Because it's too easy.
Well, I mean, would I play him? No, because he's going to be the most expensive wide receiver, and he's going to play a quarter and a half.
Yeah, but if he scores 3 touchdowns, goes for 200 yards, that's a solid day.
It is, and it's not likely.
Against Savannah State, I think it is.
Savannah State is horrible in terms of what they're going to put up against Colorado State, but at the same time, I personally wouldn't do it. I would just let it go. I'd let someone else take that plunge. If he had a good game, I'd rather kick myself in the butt for not playing him than playing him and having, Dallin Dawkins, who's the possible starting running back. I'd rather have him.
Also a transfer from a Power 5 conference into the Big Ten with Purdue.
Yeah, Purdue versus Alabama.
Hey, man, I said a Power 5 conference. I didn't compare them.
I'm just saying, I think there was a little bit of a better pedigree with Hart. That's it. And he proved it. Ultimately, he was incredible last year.
How do you know Dawkins won't come out and break all of his records?
How do you know he won't come out and break his kneecap?
Ooh, you don't, actually. Kind of like Niles Paul from the Washington Redskins when he played the Browns. Ouch.
The Browns are just going to injure all of the opposing players.
And they still lost.
Yeah. Well, I mean, devil's advocate, I don't even really want to talk about it. I'm not even a Browns fan, but I'm just saying, it's a preseason game.
Right.
I thought that McCown did good in 5 passes because he put 5 passes in the hands of a Cleveland Brown, which, if you've followed the Browns, that's much better than most quarterbacks have done in years past.
Indeed.
Moving along, we will go to New Mexico, who had the 3rd worst passing offense, the 5th best rushing offense, the 67th overall offense, the 95th passing defense, the 4th worst rushing defense, the 2nd worst overall defense. They scored 27.7 points and gave up 35.9. So, yeah, there's that.
Struggle.
The struggle is real, man.
The struggle is real for Bob Davie in his 4th year at New Mexico. I don't honestly like anything about this team. And God, I hate saying that, and I apologize to all New Mexico fans, but I don't know where this team's going to get any wins. I'm looking at their schedule.
Mississippi Valley State. Boom.
Okay.
1-1.
Tulsa, loss. Yeah. Arizona State,
really?
loss. Wyoming. Okay, and then you get in the Mountain West. And I don't know.
You do know that Tulsa's not that great, right? I really think they could potentially beat Tulsa.
No.
We'll see.
Anyhow. But no, seriously. I mean, I'm not even going to try to pronounce their tailback's name. You can try.
Why not? I got it.
Go ahead. It's all you. It's all you.
Jarrell Presley and Terrion Gibson. Not to mention that they lost another one of my favorite names in Crusoe Gongbe. Now tell me that's not a winner, too. Crusoe Gongbe.
That's pretty funny.
That is awesome. So when I look at
three offensive linemen, so if you're a tailback, you're happy about that. But I don't. I mean, quarterback wise, Lamar Jordan, projected starter, maybe. I don't know. It's struggle.
Overall, when I look at this team, I see a team that's going to have a strong offensive line because they need to, and they're going to run the ball because they need to. And this is a team that's different than Air Force. We talked about how Air Force was like great triple option scheme, and but they could pass it if they wanted to. I don't know that this team could pass it, and that's a big deal.
Interesting stat. I want to read something too. New Mexico faces 5 teams that won 4 or fewer games last season. And you only won 4 games yourself.
Right.
Last year. I don't know, dude. And I hate saying this, but I mean, New Mexico, I don't know how the high school football is down there. I don't know how they recruit. I know they got a ton of JUCO transfers coming in. So I like Bob Davie. I hope this team does well. I hope I'm dead wrong. I hope everybody can tweet at me at CFB Pros Drew and just blast me at the end of the season saying how New Mexico is so great. I just don't see it happening.
I think the defense will be slightly better. They won't be the 2nd worst, maybe like the 20th worst, but they're still going to be
progress.
Bad. And like you said, if you thought that Colorado State had it bad, New Mexico has Utah State, Boise State, and Colorado State, and then Air Force. That's the last 4 weeks of their schedule.
The schedule makers did them 0 favors.
The only team on the road is Boise, but I really don't think that matters that much.
I mean, I haven't been to a New Mexico game. Honestly, I've never been there. I've flown over to New Mexico. I went to Phoenix, Arizona, but never been there. So I don't know how the atmosphere is at New Mexico Lobo Stadium. called University Stadium, actually. Interesting. Never been there. Don't know how the atmosphere is, but yeah, I don't think Boise's going to be phased. Or, because Boise's at home.
Else.
Yeah, I don't. Colorado State, Air Force, Utah State. I don't think they're going to be all that afraid.
My gut tells me that they'll be like the 60th ranked overall defense coming into that Utah State game, and then after the Air Force game, they'll be at like 120.
You know what?
I really think they're going to get pounded that hard in those 4 games.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, one of the reasons why I think that Utah State is going to beat the holy bejesus out of them?
Why?
One of my favorite players in college football, Chucky Keaton. I mean, we can transition to Utah State real fast, but
that's where we're going, Drew.
That's what I'm saying. I set the segue up. Let's go ahead. Do the stats, and I want to talk about Chucky Keaton.
All right, I'm flexing while I do the stats, because that's what, when I think of Chucky Keaton, he makes me flex because he's such a fun player to watch if he's not hurt all the time.
True.
94th ranked passing offense, 51st ranked rushing offense, 85th ranked overall offense, 58th ranked passing defense, 24th ranked rushing defense, overall defense 31st. They scored 26.9. They allowed 19.7. And honestly, when I look at this team, I just don't see anyone that we really need to talk about. What do you think, Drew?
You know, this team returns 8 players on offense, but I don't think any of them are worth talking about. No, but dude, Chucky Keaton, a couple years ago, I remember watching a Utah State game. I think it was like a Friday night. I don't even know who they were playing. It doesn't matter. Chucky Keaton comes out there. He was a sophomore at the time, I believe. And he was running around, making plays, passing the ball, running the ball, making calls at the line. And I look over to my wife and I'm like, this kid's amazing. Why is nobody talking about him? And then as the season progressed, people did talk about him. Unfortunately, he got hurt, missed all of last year or a good portion of it. I don't remember when he got hurt exactly. I love this kid. But very honestly, I think Utah State, just like Air Force, they're going to be a sleeper team. If Boise stumbles, it's going to be to Utah State.
Definitely could be. Utah State will be playing that game at home, so they've got the little bit of advantage there. They're going to have to replace their left tackle, otherwise the offensive line looks okay. Lawan Hunt and Devontae Mays look to be the 1-2 here. I'm not really sure how the production breaks down there. I think the biggest story for me in this is that JoJo Natson is not with the team anymore.
Yeah, I did hear about that. So, I mean, do you know what happened?
I think it was disciplinary, if I'm not mistaken.
I just saw somebody said that he was no longer with the team, and I'm like, what?
Yeah, it was.
I mean, with Hunter Sharp, I mean, I think that the Natson loss hurts, but I think Devontae Robinson steps into that role, steps in nicely. The loss of production probably won't be there, but Hunter Sharp is the number 1 guy. I mean, him and Chucky Keaton all day.
I would hope so. I think they have some talent beyond that with Brandon Swindoll and Devontae Robinson, so there's opportunities there. The defense, front 4 looked great. The D-line, or the front 7 rather, the D-line returns most of their guys. The linebackers only lose their top guy. So,
and return Nick Virgil, who had 123 tackles last year.
I think Zach Virgil must have been the one that's gone then. It is. Zach Virgil's like the big playmaker. But, I mean, I think they're in good shape. The biggest downside is at defensive back. They lose their top 4, so that has to be problematic. I think that one thing that could really help this team is the fact that they're going to be breaking in so many new quarterbacks in the Mountain West this year that it actually might not hurt that bad that they're going to lose their top 4.
No, not at all. And the schedule actually, it doesn't look like it on paper, but I think it really sets up nicely for them. They open up at home against Southern Utah. I've actually never heard of Southern Utah. I'm assuming they're 1AA.
They play footballs.
Yeah, they do, and that's fine because you want Chucky Keaton to get back in there and get his feet back underneath him and just get him a good game in there. I love the schedule making in that aspect. And then you travel to Utah and to Washington, which on paper you're like, Pac-12 teams, they're going to be really good. And I do think Utah and Washington are going to be middle of the road, but I think Utah State has the capability of beating both those teams. I really do.
It's possible. It's tough for me to say if they could walk away from that 2-1. I think they're
it's a good month.
They're in phenomenal shape to take on Colorado State at home. I think that's what's going to need to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Go to Wyoming, but we
got to talk Wyoming.
Let's talk Wyoming.
What else is there to talk about in Wyoming?
They're Wyoming.
That's exactly right. 68th ranked passing offense, 80th ranked rushing offense, 84th ranked overall offense, 62nd ranked passing defense, 103rd ranked rushing defense, 91st overall defense. They scored a paltry 21.1 points and gave up 32.8. Where are you at here?
When Craig Bolt took this job, who was the former head coach of North Dakota State, when he took this, I almost I'm stumbling over my words. I'm stumbling over my words here. I expected him to only be there for 3 to 4 years. With this being a second year, he's got to show something. To get looked at for his other jobs, he's got to show something. I don't know, A, why he took the Wyoming job, and B, what was there to gain when you were winning national titles at North Dakota State? Why make the jump to Wyoming? Why not make the jump somewhere else? Be a coordinator at a Power 5 conference and then move into the head coach. The jump made no sense to me, but team-wise, I have no idea. Sean Wick at running back, probably my impact player in offense. Other than that, dude, receivers, I've heard bad things in practice. The quarterback-wise, Cameron Kaufman, Josh Allen, no idea who's starting right now, so a lot of question marks.
Yeah, I have the same question marks, and the offensive line is losing their four top talents. They're returning 3 question marks there. You don't like seeing that they're going to lose 4 top talents. Sean Wick, Brian Hill, both of them put up good stat lines. Brian Hill actually led the team in rushing just by a hair. Their statistics were pretty close, to be honest with you. I don't see much at wide receiver. They lost their top 2, but they're spreading it around, in this offense. A lot of teams are doing that in the Mountain West where there's not necessarily the guy and then there's just a group of guys. So I think the defense is probably in the same position it was last year. The defensive line played poorly last year. Hopefully spring and summer could help them move ahead. I don't really know if I'm that hopeful, though.
No, when your leading tackler is your defensive lineman, Eddie Yarbrough, with 63 tackles coming back, that's
not good.
Not good at all.
So, I mean, and their schedule, if you want to talk schedules, they have North Dakota, Eastern Michigan, but they have out of conference Washington State. I don't think that's a winnable game for them.
Then they play at App State.
That's not a winnable game for them, to be quite frank and honest with you.
That's absolutely not a winnable game, especially at App State.
At Air Force, at Boise State, at Utah State, at
wow.
San Diego State. I don't think any of those games are winnable.
And look at all the ones they have in October. I mean, you just read them: at Air Force, Nevada, at Boise, at Utah, Colorado State. That's a tough road for any team, let alone a Wyoming team that's going to struggle.
So who's your favorite out of this side of the conference then?
You know what, dude? Like I've actually gone over this a few times, and every time I come up with one team, and that team is not Boise State.
Yeah.
Call me crazy, but I think this is the year where Boise takes a step back. And that's not to say anything about Boise, because they have a great program. They're building a great tradition out there. They got the Smurf turf, love it. You know what, dude? I like Utah State this year. I mean, call me. I don't want to be the guy that's gonna pick the favorite out of every conference. So you know what? I'll take Utah State. I'll own it. I'll own Chucky Keaton. And who do you like?
Honestly,
call me crazy.
I'm in the same position as you.
Damn it.
I think it's too easy to go with Boise State.
Yeah.
I'm not. It's just, if you look when they're in between quarterbacks, they have like an 8-5 year.
Exactly, and I think
so. That's what concerns me.
Yeah, and Boise has a lot of talent, and they recruit so well just because of the name Boise. But I think with Utah State really returning the only quarterback that has any real, athletic ability, returning wise, I think this is the year for Utah State. And I really hope I'm right, because I really like the Shaiki. I've heard him in interviews. I've seen him speak, dude. He's this class act, and I hope the best for this team. I hope the best for all teams, but I hope I'm right.
Right there with you, Drew, and we are going to wrap today up, and we had a good conversation with Kelly, and we looked at the first half of the Mountain West. If anyone wants to talk to you about this, where can they find you, Drew?
You can always find me on Twitter at CFBProsDrew. And if they want to talk to you, Nick, where can they find you?
At CFB Pros on Twitter, College Football Pros on Facebook, and www.cfbpros.com online. We will see you tomorrow when we wrap up the Mountain West.